Hi guys, Chris here for 207 and we're going to get stuck straight in. So Justin, you're first up. I'm going to do your invoice first. Couple of things on here. You need the word tax before invoice, and it should be a PDF, not a Word document. Word documents are technically editable, and so PDFs if you don't set them up right, but they're a lot easier to make sure that they don't get edited. And you shouldn't be submitting them as a Word doc. Now, interestingly, you've got an error with that file, so you might want to investigate that more. I'm not sure exactly what the issue is, but my computer doesn't like it. Yeah, to the point that it's just crashed Word on me. Ah, joy. Anyway, I'll pause the video while I sort that out. Let's have a look at your image itself. So, nice presentation. You've used a very central presentation. It would be nice to have that garnish potentially offset so that you actually utilize the rule of thirds, but at the same time the way that you've spaced out the bowl and the fact that it's not totally central means that there's some flow within the image as well, so that does work. Lighting works reasonably well, except you've got a little bit of a blue light in here, and going in through Photoshop and fixing that and getting rid of this texture down the bottom, both would have been good. The beans themselves look really nice. They're glossy and steamy, and yeah, that was, and the technical side of things, your ISO's getting up there at 500, but it's not a noisy image, which is what matters for this one. And you've used a fairly wide open lens, so you've got a decent depth of field, but it's worth noting that your shutter speed is quite high, your f-stop is quite low. You could have gone and changed those around. So in this one, it's what actually matters in terms of presentation, but you should be thinking about how you're controlling your f-stop as well. And shutter speed and all the other bits and pieces, but that wide angle lens counterpoints the fact that the image isn't suffering from a shallow depth of field. It's Haley, and we'll start with your invoice. Yeah, that's looking quite good and fairly simplistic logo, shall we say. I think you could work on that, but obviously that's only a minor part of it. But you've used a nice color tone throughout the invoice. It looks professional. You've got all the things that you need in terms of tax invoice, your GST numbers, due dates, etc., and you've got your subtotal and GST calculation correct. You've rounded that one up, which is good, because it came to 475 cents, and of course that 0.5 of a cent gets rounded up to one whole. Oops, you did miss something. You missed the select date option there. So yeah, be careful when you're using presets. I recognize this one from Word, having just Word 2014s, I think, having just used it. But yeah, be careful when there are these fields, the automated fields in there. If you don't use them, you do need to get rid of them. Other than that, that's working reasonably well. In terms of this, the garnish is definitely a good idea. And you've put the garnish on the thirds, which is nice. The beans themselves are looking quite wet though. There's also no steam, and there's quite a bit of set dressing that you can do to help. You've got a bit of bean spilt on the edge of the bowl. There's a black dot in there. Removing black dots and broken beans is usually a good idea. And you've unfortunately slightly overexposed the reflection on the bowl here. Having that continue round as one solid piece would have been much better. So again, a little bit more photoshopping. You've put that white edge in here, but haven't brought it all the way around here. So you've got the right idea. And there's another splash of bean that's slopped onto the bowl. So you've got the right idea. You can deal with it either in camera and clean it up before you start taking the shots, or you can deal with them post. It's easier to get them, wipe them clean and make sure you just get it presented properly right from the start, but when you're going through the rest of the presentation, then it's worth making sure that you nail those last little bits. And obviously the easiest way of doing that is in Photoshop rather than doing a whole reshoot. Draining the baked beans though, so that they've got less juice on them. It has to be done in real life. I wouldn't even want to think about doing that as a Photoshop task. Christina, let's have a look at yours. And there's a nice use of garnish here. That's offsetting the beans quite well. Unfortunately, you're missing the steam on the beans, but you have drained most of the liquid off, which is good. The lighting, there's quite a mix of colours of lighting within your setup. You've got a yellow as your main light, and you've got secondary lights which are somewhat bluer, and so that's giving you some colour cast in here, and it would have been nice to get rid of that yellow colour cast a little bit more. The other issue is the fact that your ISO is actually really quite high. Now I'm looking at this, and 7D 400 ISO shouldn't be causing that problem unless you've cropped in too much, which is the only other thing that I can think of, but it is quite grainy. And seen as you're doing still life stuff, really dropping your ISO down as low as you can and making sure that you just increase the length of time and use your camera on a tripod to sort that. It shouldn't be an insurmountable problem. In terms of your invoice, most of the stuff's okay. It would be nice to see your logo and things a bit bigger. At the moment the address is actually the main thing there. Possibly drop photography down so that you've got Strawberry Kisses smaller, and that will give you more room to increase your logo. And your price is a little bit high. I'm not sure why you're charging more for your post-production per unit than your photography. Really, well, for me, that's the other way around. If anything, normally I charge the same amount for both, but if anything, your post-production should actually... You can do it in your own time. You're not tied down to going to a specific location and all the other bits and pieces, or having a larger amount of equipment. So yeah, not sure why that's a larger unit price. And I'm not sure why you've put travel on either. Travel when you're doing static images doesn't really make sense, and the bigger problem is the fact that you've listed it as quantity 1. If you're listing travel, then it should be listed as kilometers, and that means that $75, this current conversion is 33 cents. Sorry, 73 cents per kilometre, and so, oops, that didn't work, did it? Try that again. 73 divided by 0.73. That means, yeah, you've travelled 100 kilometres to do that. 50 kilometres each way, that's a really long trip, and doesn't really make sense. So just when you're putting charges in, and this is the only time you end up doing the invoice for this, but when you're charging stuff for clients, don't throw additional charges on that don't make any sense. And if you are going to put them on and you think that, yeah, that stuff needs to go in your quote, and you need to talk to your client about the fact that it's going to include 100 kilometres of travel, 50 kilometres each way for a packet of baked beans, and yeah, sorry, it doesn't make sense. There are other stuff that you could have added that would have made a lot more sense, but having that as a travel component doesn't. Right, Sarah, let's have a look at yours. Unfortunately, you're missing your invoice, so that's a shame. Be careful when you are asked for stuff within the assignments. There are requirements for all of the points, parts, and there are points associated with them. Unfortunately, you've missed that. You've added the steam to this one, but the steam actually looks darker than the background, which is a bit of a shame. You expect steam to be lighter, and so yeah, having it that way around is not so good. You also haven't drained your beans as much as you could have. I do like the monochromatic tone, where you've gone with the grey browns with just the red of the tomato, so that does work from a compositional point of view. Would have been nice to increase your f-stop and give yourself a much greater depth of field within that. And just little things like cleaning up the edges of your spots where your beans have gone is well worth doing. And having a little bit more of an angled directional light rather than at the moment it's a little bit flat. You've also got something weird going on around here on the base. Not sure if that's from cloning out and trying to smooth out the background, but it hasn't quite worked. And lastly, please remember to resize your images, otherwise it's going to take me ages to download the files, and I will start marking people down if you start sending in files that are the wrong size. And you do lose marks in the future if you don't send stuff in at the correct size. So that's the last thing that you need to make sure you check before you upload stuff. Right, Casey, let's have a look at yours, and we'll do the invoice first. For starters, I think your hourly rate needs to go up a little bit, and you've actually done this a different way to what we generally talk about. You usually give the unit price excluding GST and then add GST on. So if you want that GST inclusive there, probably actually needs to be next to the unit price brackets GST inclusive. It does make sense that you've pulled that out that way. Do however need to check your maths angles. Okay, so your maths is fine. What was the other thing I was going to say? Yeah, so total price is a little bit on the cheap side, but that's the least of your worries, I suppose. Your clients aren't going to complain about them being too cheap. Your bank account might. In terms of the image itself, unfortunately you've gone a little bit underexposed, well, quite a bit. You're about a full f-stop under, and if you have a look at your histogram, you can see that in your histogram you've got a huge gap between here and here where you've got items in your image that are white, and so yeah, that needs to be pushed up. Once you push it up, the whole image starts to come alive a bit more. And yes, you've got the decoration on the thirds, which is nice, but your focal plane is over this decoration, not on the beans. It would have been much stronger if you had the focal plane starting in front and going through to about where you've got, so you needed a greater depth of field in the shot to get it to work. Buttering the bread and things like that can also help with the garnishing, but you have managed to capture the steam, which is nice to see. So that's good. Right, Natasha, let's have a look at your beans. And I like the overall presentation. The dark blue background with the bowl works quite nicely. I think having this blue come across a bit further so that the whole of the bowl was on it would have helped, and I'd probably put it on a little bit more of an angle to make it look a little bit more deliberate. The biggest thing that gets me is the fact that your butter is not on your bread. I'm not quite sure why that's happening. Garnish on the beans looks good, and the beans have enough gloss on them to look glossy, but they're not overly done. We are missing the steam, unfortunately, and I don't think you needed this green up here. I think that it would have balanced quite nicely without it. The spoon, unfortunately you've let your highlights blow out on the spoon, and that means that because it's a bright area it's dragging your eye down to it. Potentially putting the spoon in the bowl so that you don't get the whole of the curve of the reflection might have helped. I'd be tempted to almost try it without it as well. You kind of need the spoon to be able to eat the beans, but where it is at the moment it's not really working as well as it could do. In terms of your GST invoice, let's see, where are we? There we go. I'll zoom out a little bit. This piece here says balance due, doesn't say GST inclusive, and you don't have GST inclusive here. You have got the GST added there, but it's not clear that this number is GST inclusive, and there's a huge break between here and here, so the formatting just needs a bit of a tweak. I'd put the attention piece up above as well, if you're going to put a balance and due thing there, just so that people know exactly who it is that's getting it before they get the information. In fact, I'd be tempted to put that balance due piece down the bottom, because you want them to get to the right piece before they find who owes the money. You've got your GST number, which is good. I would put the invoice number on a separate line and just play around with the formatting a little bit more from that point of view. GST calculation is obviously great. That's a lot easier to do when you deal with hundreds. And yeah, that's all good from that point of view. It would be nice to have a logo on there. It does make it look a little bit more professional. Let's have a look at your image, which was... Oh, God, I'm losing my marbles, aren't I? I've already done your images, sorry. Yeah, it should help if I stick to one order, wouldn't it? Right, Carolyn, let's have a look at your image. And you've done a really nice job of it. The beans look hot and steamy. There's a little bit of build-up of juice around the bottom. And the juice looks a little bit watery, but that does explain it, because you've mentioned in your thing that you washed the beans. Olive oil sometimes works better because it sticks more and gives you a higher gloss finish. But yeah, just draining off some of that excess water would have been good, but fortunately they're hidden. That build-up is mostly out of focus or hidden behind the dish, which is good. And the beans that are out there do look quite nice. I would pull your highlights back a little bit more, just to give a little bit more depth to the colour of the beans and the bread. But that's a relatively minor thing, and really the amount that I'm pulling it back is more probably monitor calibration difference than anything else. So I'm not even sure if you'll be able to see the change between the two. Let's hit reset and see if you can see it. It just enriches the colour a little bit more. I potentially knock off a little bit of the saturation of the tomatoes behind, just because they are pulling your eye, they're fighting with your eye against the beans themselves, and I think you've just punched the saturation up a little bit too much, so it's grabbing your attention. But that's a relatively minor thing. The fact that they are tomatoes works with the beans. It still helps tell the story. In terms of the invoice, unfortunately you've put it in a Word document, not a PDF, and there's a lot more that could be done with formatting in terms of having logos and things, making that professional, but also in terms of the way that you've laid this out. You shouldn't have anything else coming into the row where you've got the quantity and the unit price, and your formatting should be the same the whole way through, so it's $15.00, and have that all line up. A lot easier to do if you pop it into a table, do all that table stuff, and then you can actually hide the table borders. Where are we? Draw table, no borders, and you can still have everything lined up perfectly within that table and not have it visible. So I'm going to have to undo that lot to get rid of it. So yeah, there's some work that needs to be done on that. You've got your tax invoice bits and pieces, you've got the GST number, and everything else is good. But yeah, just those couple of things that you can work on for when you're actually going to be charging clients, and just make sure that you've take some time, put in a logo, and generate a logo. It makes people feel that they're actually dealing with a professional, which is always helpful from getting a resale point of view. Right, Livon, let's have a look at yours. And I'm reading through your information about the fact that you did a reshoot at the last minute. I'm not sure that you did yourself any favours, because you've ended up using a much higher ISO. And these beans are quite dried out, which is, well, the sauce looks very, very gluggy on them, which is unfortunate. Um, the vertical lighting, I can sort of see it working, and you have got a kind of natural vignette in there, which does help from the composition point of view. Um, the bread soldiers that you've put on feel a little bit squashed in there, rather than being a really nice addition. I like the way that you've laid the spoon out, but finding a spoon that's not got scratches in it is also really useful, unless the setup really calls for it to be an old scratch spoon, because it's that level of professionalism that you're looking for within the shot. And yeah, not easy to deal with. Potentially you can deal with it in Photoshop and clone out some of the scratches and soften the reflection, but easier to do if you've actually got a spoon that doesn't have that challenge in the first place. I like the idea of having the, excuse me, salt and pepper pots behind, but I think some more of set dressing in terms of something on top of the beans, like parsley or cheese, could have actually helped set that off as well, and not going for that central composition and using the rule of thirds to make sure that you're guiding the person's eye around and to the beans on that one piece would have helped. But having said that, you have used a relatively muted colour palette everywhere else and just the beans for that centre, so it does have an interesting point from that composition option. The biggest challenge that I have with it is those beans are lacking the steam and they're looking quite gluggy, and yeah, that's the main part of the product that you're trying to sell, and I can entirely understand why you'd be put off baked beans for a while as well. In terms of your invoice, it's relatively clean and simple, which is fine. Um, there is a splash of colour in it within this inserted table here, and getting rid of that just so that it's a straight black and white would give it a bit more consistency. And really, I'd like to see, from the fact that you're a photographer, it makes a lot of sense if you're actually presenting stuff with an artistic point of view in mind. So you're actually making sure that you're utilizing your logo. It's a distinctly utilitarian invoice, which, yeah, doesn't have the same impact in that you're doing design photography work. And remember that if you've got an invoice that people are looking at and going, "Oh, that's pretty," they won't notice the price as much. No, that's not true. They will still notice the price. But actually, that's an interesting question. I need to do some research on that one. But what will happen is they'll look at the invoice and think, "Oh, that's nice." And if they're looking at getting a letterhead redesigned, they might end up coming back to you for something else. So yeah, it can be one of those things where it can generate more business. Right, Michelle, let's have a look at yours. And there's some nice presentation going on there. I think you've gone a little bit overboard with the garnish, but it's nice to see that you've got the toast in there, and it's, yeah, quite nicely laid out. A panoramic shot which works. Unfortunately, your beans have got really dry in the process, and they are missing the steam, which would have been really nice to have on there. The other big challenge that I have is you've got a huge colour cast, and I think it's been really difficult for you to fix, because my guess is that you've got multiple colour sources, coloured light sources coming in. Your main one is a yellow tungsten light coming in from this side, but you've got a bluish light coming in here, and although you've done a reasonable job of colour balancing this area, the rest of the image is still quite yellow, and if you try and colour balance that, everything else ends up purple. I'll pull that back so it ends up losing the bluey green colour that we had. And if you try and colour balance this, then it ends up being somewhat greener than than you'd like. So yeah, you've made your job harder than it needed to be because you've got that color balance in there issue in the first place. Having said that, you have gone to the warmer color balance option, and you've gone with a yellow color, which kind of helps the beans feel somewhat warmer. Had you gone with a blue, is definitely not the right way to go, but making sure that your setup in the first place isn't introducing multiple colors, lights sources, then that can help. And sometimes the issue with that is to turn all the other lights off, pull the curtains, and just rely on your lights that you've got. You've also got an issue where your shutter speed is higher than it needs to be with your ISO, but your ISO is not actually causing any noise at this point, so something to still be aware of. And if you, yeah, while you're looking at stuff, you've got that f-stop and the decent depth of field, which is good, but there were two other things in there that you could have potentially tweaked, and might have saved you an issue later on. But maybe with your camera, what are you shooting? 70D seems to run okay with that high ISO, but yeah, as long as you're confident in that, you know that it's not going to be an issue, then that's okay, but generally you're better off dropping that back down a little bit. Almost forgot your invoice. So the first thing is that it can do with a lot more in the way of formatting and making your name and your business much more prominent, logo, etc. Putting spaces between your phone numbers and the fact that you actually say that that's your phone number. And what else are we need to make sure that we've got on there? We haven't got a GST number, which is not good, and you're also undercharging really for this type of job. Lastly, you need to have a subtotal around here, so you've got your rate times 2. That gives you your line total and then your subtotal underneath, rather than relying on this, because this looks like $20 of 3 hours. Oh, is that 3 lots of 20, or is that $20 and we're charging below minimum wage? It isn't clear because it says set amount for the job. So yeah, you need to have that extra line down here to show what the sum total of each line is, and then that starts to make a little bit more sense. And lastly, we get into the subtotal, which you've got here is $101. Then you've got the GST, and then you've got the balance due. That doesn't make sense. So this is where having that, let's drag this into an Excel file so we can actually do it properly. I'm just going to pause this so I can set it up. Right, so what I've done is pulled all the information in, almost, I had $20 an hour at post-production was the 1 hour. So what we're going to do is create a line total, which, in case you haven't used Excel, I'll just show you how to do it because it's a lot easier than doing it all by hand. Press equals, select the rate that you're going to multiply it by and the amount that gets multiplied by, so that's B4 times C3, which are the two squares. Press enter and it'll come up with $3, so $1.50 times 2. And then what you can do is you can drag this line down by grabbing the corner and it will duplicate the same thing. Now we don't need those two blanks, so we can delete those, and then we can add them all up. Now you can either go equals, enter, and then add them all like that, or you can do this. We're in the home page, auto sum, and it'll grab everything above it, which is quite a nice way of doing it. So there's your subtotal, $101. Okay, so that subtotal was correct. Times by 0.05, which is the GST, which is $15.15. Now for the grand total, that is that one and the subtotal together. So you should be charging $116.15 for your actual cost, not subtracting them. So unfortunately, yeah, that part's definitely not correct, but hopefully that showing you how to do it that way helps. Right, Michael, let's have a look at yours. And you've gone for a very simplistic presentation of the beans. I think it has potential, but really I would have liked to see a little bit more set dressing in here. The biggest challenge that I have is that your exposure is quite under. If we pull it up another, a full stop, that's 0.8 of a stop, it starts to behave itself for the exposure. What I'd probably actually do is pull it up even further, pull back the highlights, and then decrease some of those blacks so that we actually end up with a bit more contrast in the whole image. I'm going to hit give us a virtual copy so we can bounce between the two, and you can see that the beans with that process are significantly brighter, even though the rest of the bowl hasn't necessarily changed too much. With the lighting, you've got quite a bluish cast coming in here, and that's something to be aware of. I suspect you've got a mixed light source there. The beans themselves, the colour balance is pretty close to okay. Could potentially be brought in to be a little bit more yellow, a little bit more red even, just to try and bring out some of that colour. So there's still a long way that you could take the photo even as it sits, and I'd probably then darken down the background to bring it down to somewhere where you had it sitting. In terms of the invoice, where are we? Hang on, I've lost your invoice. Oh yeah, it's a Word document. Right, so that's the first problem. It should be a PDF. Remember that, so that it's not able to be changed. You need the words tax invoice, not just invoice, and you need to clearly identify what your GST number is. I'm not sure if that's your GST number or if that's your phone number, and it's not clearly identifiable which, so it's the same as if you hadn't included it. The other thing is be careful what you're charging your client for. You've put in 10 hours at $40, which, okay, $400 isn't unreasonable, but you're charging me for 3 concepts and you've only supplied 1. That is going to, not make me happy. If you want to charge me for 1 concept the same price and give me the other 2 free, I might feel a little bit happier about it, but I don't have the other 2, so don't include stuff in your invoices that you're not passing on to the client. Now, that's not something that's going to change your grade noticeably because of the other issues around the pieces that are missing, but if you were putting this on and you've done everything else correct and you tried to charge me for that amount, I'm not going to be particularly happy as a client. And remember, you're treating your tutors as clients for this one, so don't surprise us with extra bills. If you want to renegotiate the terms, then that's fine. You can renegotiate the terms, but you do need to contact your tutor client about what you're providing, and you've been given the brief. If you don't understand the brief, or you want to confirm that what you're doing is the right thing for what your client is after, then yeah, drop them a line, talk to them. They're going to be much happier if you talk to them and provide what you want than surprise them with something that they weren't quite after. Right, Leighton, let's have a look at yours, and I'm liking the colour tone with the dish and the salt and pepper shakers. Sausages on top, they work, I suppose. It looks like you've done a little bit of Photoshop to them, and they've ended up with a somewhat weird flat colour palette. I'm trying to work out how to describe it. It's almost like a painted effect on the top, and yeah, that just looks a bit odd. Not sure if it's when you put the steam on or or something else in the post-production that the beans have lost some of their detail. The simplicity of the background works really well, the lighting's good. There is a little bit of a tweak that needs to happen with the crop so that the salt and pepper shakers are on the vertical. Obviously that then causes you a problem with this here being too close, but you can Photoshop that out and give yourself some more room to include that. But yeah, straightening it up would make a little bit of a difference to it as well. Lighting, as I said before, is good, and yeah, there's no noise generated issues, which is great to see. In terms of the invoice, I'm liking the logo. That's nice and clean. You've got tax invoice in there, which is good. You have, however, got a unit price for your post-production of $50 an hour, quantity 1, and for some reason you've ended up charging 25, and that's been followed on through to your total, which is unfortunate. And your calculation of the total amount of GST in that is correct, and you've rounded that correctly, which is good. It would be normal to add GST on top of what you've charged, rather than having it included. If you are including it, then sometimes you end up having to charge more just to make sure that you're covering the GST of what you're putting in there. And yeah, I think that was it from that. But I like the look of the invoice. It's nice and clean,